This is episode 258 of Mitolife Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm interviewing my friend Pedro DoAmaral. Pedro has studied biochemical sciences, chemistry, physics, and mathematics for several years. He's one of the smartest guys that I know, and that reflects well in this show, where we talk about the beneficial compounds found in both food and supplements. We talk about milk, and the one that Pedro does the best on. He talks about why he likes eating higher protein, why he likes raw vegetables. He shares his long COVID journey and what he did to recover, why he likes nicotine and tobacco so much. I ask him his thoughts on eating fermented foods and taking probiotics, the difference between supplementing niacin and niacinamide, the benefits of supplementing zinc, his thoughts on seed oils, polyunsaturated fats, vitamin E, sun exposure, hair tissue mineral analysis. He breaks down how Fucoxanthin interacts with light. I ask him about the difference between phosphatidylserine and phosphatidylcholine. I get his thoughts on beef liver and oysters. We talk about melatonin, magnesium, shilajit. Then I ask him listener questions, including how long do PUFAs versus saturated fats stay in the tissues? Does growth hormone from elk velvet or colostrum get into the bloodstream? Recommendations for teeth health, effects of Megadosing, flavonoids, food and supplements for skin health, his thoughts on chrononutrition. Are TMA and TMAO a concern? His thoughts on supplementing peptides, his favorite synergistic food combinations, and a ton more. So enjoy the show. Here is Pedro DoAmaral. Okay, we're here with my good friend Pedro DoAmaral. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, Matt.
Yeah, so in this show, we're going to focus on the compounds in food and supplements and the difference between them. And I wanted to talk to you about this because you're so knowledgeable on plant compounds and just food compounds in general, and both flora and fauna products, and just the differences between them and where supplements could be better or where foods can be better. Because I see in these health communities, it's usually either or, and I think there is room for always both. And I see a lot of demonization of supplements too. So I'd like to get your take on that. But before we get into all that, how did you get interested in human health in the first place?
It started with trying to optimize my health and fitness, just for performance reasons, like going to the gym and working out. And then the dog that I had at the time, his name was Bucky, he got Lyme disease. And I was trying to figure out how to help him. How do I go about treating Lyme disease? Because at the vet, they basically gave him the typical doxycycline, the antibiotic that they use for it. And after that, they assumed that he was better, but he kept gradually declining year after year. So I got into physiology and biochemistry and realized that I should pursue medicine. And that led to me realizing that even at the highest level in medicine, which are things like synthetic biology, medicinal biochemistry, et cetera, you hit a wall where you start to have more unanswered questions than answers that you were originally looking for, which is why I transitioned into now math, physics, and chemistry. And that's my path at the moment, to try to get to the root of, from first principles, how our biology works so that we can optimize our health.
That's awesome. So do you think that it's true that physics precedes biology?
Yeah, there's a concept of emergence that is the one thing that separates physics from biology. But yes, from fundamental principles, you can really model biological systems effectively. We still use physics pretty heavily for biology, which is why the whole field of biophysics is still taking off. But there's a point in which complexity and chaos theory becomes too dominant to ignore, that simple models don't work as effectively. There's a confidence range for any model for a biological system. And that's again, just to do with complexity.
Do you think we're at the place where we can begin to apply like quantum physics principles to human health, or is that still too much in its infancy to try to even start to apply that to?
Yeah, I think that there's some solid quantum biological explanations for things like how birds use magnetoreception to navigate throughout the globe. The way that hydrogen transfer and electron transfer, like electron tunneling, you've heard of before, happens in DNA that causes de novo mutations. Like right there and then, there's a electron tunneling event that changes DNA's code that causes a mutation. But then there's other things like when you really get down to physics at the graduate level, they talk about something called quantum field theory. And even at the graduate level, the descriptions that they give for quantum field theory and why it's accurate, but it's not exactly a representation of our world, starts to get murky. And so anybody that goes that extra step, like somebody like Jack Kruse, who knows and talks about quantum field theory, but doesn't actually do it, you start to piece together that even physicists aren't sure that their models are accurate. And so there's a cutoff between utilizing quantum field theory and deeper physics to explain biological phenomenon. It's like, we don't even know if the physics is correct. How can we trust that the physical explanation for biology is correct?
That's a good point. Yeah. Interesting. So your dog had Lyme disease.
Yeah.
You tried to reverse engineer that, got into all these other fields. And it looks like looking at your social media, you were influenced by Ray Peat. Is that correct? And
Yeah, it wasn't until I actually saw Ray Peat in 2015, way before I got into medicine, and his idea of drinking Coca-Cola for health, it rubbed me off the wrong way, and I completely ignored him until about 2020 when he started to get popularity again. But I can't say that he's the only person that influences me. I think that, for example, in contrast to what a lot of Peters say, I think that there's benefit to ketogenic diets for certain conditions like brain tumors and brain cancers, especially. A Pete principle will not work for somebody that has a glioblastoma in their brain. But then, yeah, most of his stuff regarding hormones and progesterone, pregnenolone, I think is very useful.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I told you when we were meeting in person last week that for one of my family members, exogenous ketones has been tremendously helpful for heart health, where like nothing else worked, like diet didn't work. So that was pretty cool to see real time.
And I mentioned in that convo how there are certain patients with heart failure that the only thing that works for them so that they don't die is actually going into a ketotic state.
Right. Right. And maybe not forever, right? That's I think where people would can maybe misconstrue that. It's you can just do it for a short time therapeutically, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. So so as far as beneficial compounds and foods and supplements, I've been in, studying natural health since like 2010 and went in and out of various different diets and ideologies, philosophies. Some people call them health religions. And I just saw all the different viewpoints. And then at times I would demonize certain foods, so completely cut them out. And I think now we're pretty much doing the same thing, which is pretty much not restricting anything. We had breakfast together and pretty much everything on the menu we could eat, which for a lot of people, because of lectins, phytates, all the anti-nutrients that people talk about in food, uh, they're really restricted. Um, but what I like about your social media and what you share a lot of is a lot of the benefits of these so-called anti-nutrients, the ones that aren't talked about, those really powerful phytochemicals that help combat cancer, neurodegeneration, and diabetes. Um, so is that kind of a journey that you went on to with restricting different foods and adding them back in, or?
Yeah, that's why I got into Ray Peat in the first place, because I did very good with a carnivore, a ketogenic approach, but I also realized that some aspects of my health suffered, like performance went down because you need glycolytic metabolism that's basically burning carbs to effectively weight lift. And when I started to listen to Ray Peat stuff and apply it, I started to realize, oh no, there's benefit even in the most mundane stuff like glucose. Glucose is still a very important molecule for glutathione synthesis. Without glucose, you can't make as much glutathione. But it also has a caveat in that any molecule can have negative and positive effects at the same time. It's a paradoxical truth that most people don't seem to get around. Like when we talk about PUFAs or lectins, they can be harmful, and they're specifically harmful to specific kinds of people, their genetics, or if they have consumed so much PUFA that they have so much stored in their tissues, then that's a concern. But for somebody, let's say an African kid that was starved for years and he starts to consume vegetable oils, it's going to have a pro metabolic effect on itself because he's starved in the first place. It's a give or take with certain food items. But yeah, and as I got deeper into food chemistry, I started to experiment with a lot of the principles again and seeing them from more of a chemical perspective. Like, why is it that I feel more clarity on meat versus when I'm on an omnivore based diet? And I can kind of point to ketones being one of the reasons. But at the same time, one thing that I realized was when I'm on an omnivore based diet, I can think faster. I can compute things faster. I may have more mental clarity, but I'm not computing things as fast. It's one of the things that helped with keeping a pretty high grade during my biomed degree.
Hmm. So eating less, so eating more on the carnivore side, you had more
Mental
clarity,
clarity. Yeah,
more
like
mental clarity.
I didn't have brain fog. I can just feel the day better. My senses were heightened, but it didn't mean that I can think better in more abstract, more creative terms.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, when I went to private university, I was mostly living on raw goat milk that I would pick up from a farm like every few weeks and shilajit. And I credit that for my grades. Like that was the majority throughout the day. I was just fasting on goat milk.
Hmm,
And yeah, it was like laser clarity. It's nuts.
interesting. And goat
Could have
milk,
been
goat milk is yeah,
MCTs in goat milk, right?
yeah. That too. I was gonna say that it has like immunoglobulins. It has a ton of proteins that are really medicinal, peptides in general.
Yeah, it's incredible. That it seems like there's still an argument about uh raw milk versus pasteurized. And this is where I see people get really militant. And I think a lot of it comes from like the Ogdenus Vonderplanets, you should never sterilize your food,
Hmm.
raw community, where to me it just becomes a religion, right? It's not really based on science anymore. It's just based on what this one guy said that's no longer with us, and you're not going by research.
Yeah, even if it wasn't like research based, I still go instinctually. I do think I feel better when it's raw milk versus pasteurized, but then again, it's like it has to be a very specific brand. Since I've been here, I've been able to try three different brands of raw milk and raw goat's milk, and only one of those brands were actually good to me, where I didn't have digestive disturbances. The other two, sure, I didn't do well with it. It had probably bad bacteria, and you can't get around that. And the only way to get around it is pasteurizing. So it's very specific when it comes to raw milk products for me.
Hmm. Yeah, in certain states, I noticed like in Washington, it's very hard. Like in the store, you can't buy raw milk, right? It's not really legal.
Yeah, it is here, but I don't think that all stores sell it. Like Whole Foods doesn't sell it.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Was there something that you found with those three brands, like the Guernsey versus Jersey or
Mhm. Yeah,
A2?
that's a good point. I didn't realize until you just mentioned now, but it is A2 milk and it is Jersey cows, if I'm not mistaken. So that could be the reason why. I wasn't sure about the other two brands. I don't recall exactly, but I do know that it tasted different and it was more sour, which it could just be that the milk went bad, but it didn't reach the expiration date. So I don't know for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel better on raw milk too. We're doing A2 Guernsey milk, and once it sours, we just give it to the chickens, which is
Hmm.
awesome. And we notice actually giving the chickens steak and soured raw milk, they produce way more eggs whenever we
Mm,
do that.
interesting, huh?
It's pretty cool. Yeah, steak fed chickens, that's the next level.
I mean, they are carnivore, right? They come from T-Rex originally. I don't know if that's validated, but that's what I heard, that they're more reptiles than they are mammals.
Yeah, yeah, they're really interesting uh, creatures for sure.
Hmm.
Um, so what's your current kind of diet now that you're doing? Just a mix of everything? Like,
I always tend to stay higher protein. I like how I feel when it's higher protein. I'm more satiated. My
mm,
body composition is better. I'm less I don't have any spikes in terms of blood glucose throughout the day where it's up and down, hypoglycemic, hyperglycemic. But yeah, it's pretty varied. I tend to eat a lot of vegetables. I love vegetables. I know some people don't do good with them, but I do good with them raw, especially. And I eat plenty of eggs. I eat plenty of bread, sourdough bread with minimal ingredients. So it's unbleached flour bread that does have gluten, but I don't mind for myself. And plenty of butter, plenty of animal products, and minimal amounts of fruits right now. I don't have a need to consume more fruits, but if I do, it's going to be berries mostly.
Mm. So is that because you're following like a seasonal approach or any
Just
reason for?
just don't feel like having some fruits right now. I don't want an apple.
Interesting. I don't feel the same if I don't eat like an apple a day at least. I love just cut it up and just eat it straight without anything.
Mhm.
That's what I've been doing. So when you say higher protein, is that like 100 grams a day or
I
what's
don't even I don't
roughly?
even count it
If
anymore.
you had to
But
guess,
yeah,
yeah.
I would say over 100 every single day for sure. Probably below 150 on most days. And if I work out, which I haven't done in a very long time, it'll definitely be close to my body weight. So 180, 190.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, raw vegetables, that's something that it seems like we're in the minority because even in like when I was in the Ray Peat community and studying for years, I was seeing a lot of it was just cooked. Like you're not supposed to eat raw greens, especially, right?
Hmm.
Um, and the
Yeah.
idea is because it could feed bad bacteria in your gut.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and the goitrogens and cruciferous vegetables affecting the thyroid, which some of that has validity. It's true to some extent. If you're iodine deficient, it's more of a concern. But where most people get it wrong is that even with carrot, which is considered, I guess, a root vegetable, it's still causing gut bacteria to ferment the fibers in carrots. And if you're going to base your argument off of carrots have antifungal, antibacterial properties, so does cabbage, so does
Mm.
onion, so does garlic. And it's not so much that the vegetables bad, but rather some people just can't tolerate certain sugars in those vegetables. Like raffinose is one in broccoli that causes gas if somebody has the wrong type of gut bacteria. So they may not be tolerating the sugars that are present in broccoli versus the ones that are present in carrots.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah, I love onions and garlic. I don't know why people don't
Mhm.
use those all the time.
They're one of the FODMAP items, food items that most people have trouble digesting. And I think the sulfur, some people can't break down sulfur, or they have sulf oxidase enzyme mutations that make it difficult for them to tolerate more sulfur.
Wow. I had on the podcast several times before he passed, Dr. Cass Ingram, and he popularized like wild oregano in the supplement industry. And I actually saw him speak live several times, and he was a huge proponent of thyme, uh, not only oregano, but thyme, basil, all the like aromatic herbs
Hmm.
because of their uh, not only their effects against pathogens, but they actually stimulated, was it the osteoblast to lay down new bone matrix? And he had
Hmm.
a whole presentation on that I loved. And that was fascinating to me because I think people don't often think of these spices when they think of bone health, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. If you look at things purely from like a molecular biology perspective, you can get caught in the pathways that have been identified. Like if you consume glucose, it has to go through the insulin receptor or the GLUT receptor. Then it goes into the mitochondria and you burn it for energy. But what's really happening is this kind of combinatorial chemistry space where it's like glucose synthesizes glutathione, but it also gets burned in mitochondria, but it also gets burned in the cytoplasm, and it also regulates gene expression, and it also has an effect on histones. It's like there's so much going on that you could probably find anything happening for any molecule. The idea that I came to think of just now when you talked about thyme and other spices and herbs having an effect on bone health is a possibility that they inhibit estrogen and estrogen signaling, because I know many of them are aromatase inhibitors. And if you inhibit aromatase, you tend to promote more bone growth and less bone senescence, where the bone cells actually become they age faster. So it could be that that's one mechanism by which it's happening, but I'm sure there's many others. That's interesting though. Never knew that thyme could do that.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Have you ever used those like medicinally? Like I've done a lot of experiments with, I guess it's another animal, but oregano oil, which is so
Mhm.
concentrated.
Yeah, I've done high dose oregano oil for a long period of time. I've done thyme oil. as the essential oil, in fact, recently for my cognitive health when I was dealing with the long COVID stuff. And I do think that it moved the needle a lot. It's very potent. And it also made me smell through all of my orifices in a very weird way. Like you could smell the thyme coming out of my armpits. Very potent stuff. But I haven't tried things like rosemary in high doses, but I love the way I feel on rosemary as an alcohol extract, like tinctures.
Mm. Yeah, I think I saw have been putting that in their coffee the last few years. A little bit
Hmm.
of rosemary, like a sprig of rosemary or something. I haven't tried it yet.
It's good. I can't say like I notice a massive difference, but it does help with just mood for me.
Hmm. Yeah, there's some interesting like folklore I've heard on can't remember if it was the Romans were used rosemary for memory, like they would just put it around the house. I don't know. There's when you look
Hmm.
into every herb, the history on it gets
Hmm.
nuts.
Yeah.
Some-
Yeah. That's a
so,
great point.
so you mentioned long COVID for cognitive health, and yeah, I forgot you were dealing with that, and that's one thing that I wanted to cover. Um, so time oil was there anything else that really helped move the needle in recovery?
Man, so the way that it started for me was December of last year. And right away, I got to try most things that most people would try, like melatonin, glutathione, um, sulfur-based compounds like N-acetylcysteine, and most of them did have some kind of effect. Melatonin, especially, fasting had a really good effect on my health. But the one thing that immediately gave me back my brain function, so long as I was using it, and then when I was off, it was back to the same symptoms, was nicotine. Nicotine was the one thing that right away, within 10 minutes of smoking pure tobacco, um, my symptoms went away. Or within 10 minutes of utilizing a patch, the symptoms started to diminish, and the patch releases it slowly. So I prefer the pure tobacco as well. And aside from that, quercetin with bromelain for the associated microclots that they talk about, that really did help. Within 2 weeks, the tremors that I had, internal tremors, they completely went away. So those probably were the big two. And then what seemed to keep things from getting worse and actually maintain my baseline health that I had before was Mitolife's Dissolve It All, the serapeptase blend with bromelain and papain and papase. And the reason why that seems to work is it breaks down the amyloidogenic like proteins that are found in these long COVID patients.
Wow, that's incredible. I think it's awesome that something that you can get at almost any grocery store, which is
Mm-hmm.
nicotine or tobacco, was the thing that
Mm-hmm.
helped the most. What? How many milligrams were the patches you were
It was
using?
7 milligrams at the lowest. That's the lowest you can get. And even that was too much for me. Like I'm very sensitive to stimulants. So within 2 hours, I would get tachycardia. And I'm like, I can't keep the patch on. But even after just utilizing it for 2 hours, for 12 hours out of the rest of the day, my symptoms were almost gone, if not totally gone.
Wow. But yet you can handle a cigar, which isn't that more than 7 milligrams, or is
Yeah.
it just the delivery's different?
Yeah, it's
So it's
definitely more. If you smoke the entire cigar, there's way more nicotine. However, if you only keep it in the mouth, it has to cross through the buccal tissue, which is probably less than if you inhale it.
hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's fascinating. And yeah, I think one of my favorite I think it is the favorite thing that you share a piece of information is for um COVID, there was a study showing caffeine and nicotine
Hmm.
combined were super effective, right?
Yeah, it was. So it started with this physician that was trying to treat his long COVID patients, and he had a similar idea of it being like cholinergic syndrome, which is a condition in which there's too much choline in the body. And so you get pretty similar presentations like the long COVID patients have. So he thought, well, then if choline is the issue, I have to treat it with something that binds to cholinergic receptors better. That would be nicotine. So he gave 5 patients nicotine. They saw dramatic improvements in most of their symptoms, if not all of their symptoms. Like all of them had improvements, but it's a short case report. They're not going to use nicotine in a clinical trial, but nonetheless, to me, that's clinical evidence. Even if it's 5 people, and willingly, it was enough for me to willingly try nicotine. So then a group of researchers saw this, and they're like, okay, how is it happening? They went and they did in silico models where they take proteins that are interacting with nicotine and choline and predicting through computer programs how the interaction occurs, what's happening. What they find is that nicotine is binding to the same receptors that choline binds to, and dislodges the spike protein from the receptor. So what's happening theoretically with long COVID patients is the spike protein gets produced in residual amounts or it gets retained and it isn't being broken down. And it binds to the cholinergic receptors, and then choline signaling is altered. And so you have all of these cholinergic-like symptoms, thus why it mimics cholinergic syndrome. But nicotine, being a stronger agonist for the receptor, dislodges the spike protein and allows proper choline signaling to go back and forth.
Hence the mental clarity, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool. Wow. Did you ever try methylene blue?
I have, and it was one of the things that did help me many times, but it wasn't enough. Like within 4 hours of trying it, the symptoms would come back. So I did 1 milligram up to 10 milligrams up to one time 20 milligrams, and I did it going out in the sun, in the Florida sun at the time. So I get the most effect from methylene blue with photoredox chemistry. But even then, it didn't move the needle quite like nicotine. And the reason why is methylene blue is working on serotonin receptors, serotonin enzymes, but it isn't working on the cholinergic system.
Got it. What about high dose vitamin C? Did you ever give that a shot?
Yeah, with quercetin, it helps a lot. The Mitolife one again. I combine the quercetin and bromelain. I combine it with the Mitolife vitamin C. The dissolve it all. I space it out. So it's 3 weeks on, and then I take time off. If my symptoms come back, I'll bring it back on. Simply because it's very powerful. And I use one more ingredient. Oh, garlic extract to thin the blood, and it seems to help a lot.
And with the quercetin, bromelain, you were taking those separately in higher doses, right? Or
it was a combination. I forgot the exact brand that I'm using. Doctor's Best maybe is the brand, but it's 500 milligrams of dihydroquercetin, which is the more potent form, and it comes with, I believe, some units. I think 100 units of bromelain. Bromelain, surprisingly enough, I was like, "What is bromelain?" Once I started taking it, and researchers don't even know themselves. It's like this combination of protein degrading enzymes that can differ between species to species of plants.
Wow. And that's an extract from pineapple, right?
Yeah, but it's present in some other plants as well, but mostly from
Oh,
pineapple.
wow. Yeah, I was telling you that quercetin, I'm kind of prone to allergies. I mean, I grew up when my mom was cleaning and dusting the house, I'd just be sneezing all day long. Extreme dust allergies, but even seasonal pollen uh, and recently when I've had sneeze attacks, I've gone to dihydroquercetin, but it was this very particular like fluffy light powder, and I would just take it sublingually, and it felt like within 30 seconds to a minute, it would just stop my allergic reaction in its tracks. So I'm trying to track that down and make it a new Mitolife product because you can't buy it anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the plant that you have in mind is totally different source too. It must contain some other potent ingredients.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Super powerful. Um, and let's see. So melatonin, NAC, dissolve it all. Um, yeah, a lot of people don't realize the power of systemic enzymes that could help like almost anything, right? Because it'll break down proteins, scar tissue that's kind of a byproduct of inflammation.
Yeah.
So they're powerful. I think I first heard about them for cancer therapy, which I don't market it that way, but
I wouldn't be surprised, man. I think the only thing I can think of how it might work for cancer. So cancer cells are trying to metastasize. So they go to different parts of the body. To do that, you got to break down the extracellular matrix, and you also got to shield yourself from immune cells. I think they use neutrophils. That neutrophils are a subset of immune cells. They've released DNA to make what's called a neutrophil extracellular trap. So it's this mesh that prevents things from getting out. They use this against tuberculosis, for example, to prevent it from spreading. But it's possible that cancer cells use this to their advantage to multiply without the immune cells getting to them. And I'm sure systemic enzymes are going to break that apart.
wow. Yeah, back in my vegan days, I was taking handfuls of digestive enzymes, thinking that it would do the same thing, but it's different mechanisms, right? With amylase and lipase and protease.
Yeah, amylase is for carbohydrates, lipase for lipids, protease is for different sorts of protein, and then serrapeptase. I don't recall exactly, but it must be a protease.
Yeah, I believe it is. Yeah, it's. What do you think about? I think this is another like raw vegan kind of thing. And I mean, I still take digestive enzymes with every meal because it makes sense to me that after you pick a fruit or a vegetable, like say you buy it at the grocery store, the enzyme count is at least cut in half, perhaps more, as time goes on after you pluck it from the ground and it's
Mm-hmm.
disconnected. So,
Yeah, yeah. I don't know a way to explain this because I haven't looked too deeply into it, but I do know exactly what you're talking about. I'm gonna go on a hunch and say that what's probably happening there. So raw vegans consume raw fruits and vegetables because they have live enzymes, and those live enzymes help with many different things, which is true. You can get enzymes that mimic glutathione peroxidase, so that it synthesizes something similar to glutathione that acts as an antioxidant. But to actually get the enzyme to work in the body to cross the gut barrier to be in the bloodstream or to reach the tissues can be different. And even if you were to get to that enzyme, for it to be active after you ingest it in stomach acid with a different pH level, it might turn it inactive. So there's probably something to do with just the cellular environment where the enzyme is found in the plant. As soon as it's ingested, it can be probably turned inactive. But it's also possible that the enzyme becomes inactive as soon as you pluck the plant or the fruit from its source, simply because the enzyme recognizes, or the cells recognize that it's being eaten. And like when plants are eaten, they release defense chemicals. So similar mechanism here, and they shut off the enzymes that are producing supportive health compounds and activate the ones that aren't producing that. And like, for example, releasing lectins or sulforaphane or any of these other molecules to defend itself.
wow, interesting. Yeah, that was kind of my philosophy in having a greenhouse here in the snow, a dome to grow food through the winter was because for like 6 months out of the year, I'm fully reliant on the grocery store. And there's no fresh huckleberries to pick, in the backyard.
Mhm.
So I figure my enzyme ingestion is probably way down.
Yeah. Yeah. I see
Although
where
I
he's.
do drink like fermented noni juice and, there's enzymes in raw milk, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. The bacteria too. I think it's underestimated just how much bacteria and even archaea, for all we know, produce enzymes that sit in the gut extracellularly or can dissolve through the gut matrix, the gut lining into the extracellular matrix into our blood lining, our blood supply, and work its magic there. It's beautiful how the entire system of bacteria and archaea support our health in ways that we don't even recognize at the moment.
yeah, it's wild. Do you think taking probiotics are necessary for the most part, or can we just eat fermented foods? Like, I think a couple of years ago, I had Sally Fallon on the show, and I think the Weston A. Price thing is consume sauerkraut with every meal.
Mhm.
That's what she was saying.
Yeah, I think that it's good to consume fermented foods and fermented products in general, but some people will need probiotics. And the reason why is because probiotics are very curated with the type of species for their effects. And they'll produce some specific molecules like acetic acid or propionate or other molecules that support brain health, gut health, heart health. That's very systematic, meaning that researchers can quantify it and they know the effect and they know that it's going to have a clinical effect on these sets of patients. But there's so many other molecules and so many other pathways that bacteria interact with that produce good health outcomes that we don't even know about. That's only present in naturally occurring foods, soil, places, environments that we're exposed to, the air that we're exposed to. I can think of one right off the top of my head, Clostridium. Clostridium species of bacteria, some of them can be really bad. Like Clostridium difficile causes C. diff, and you got to be hospitalized for it. But then there's other species of Clostridium that are so important, and we don't know why that is. Meaning researchers have not quantified exactly why. When it comes to neural and cognitive behavioral effects, preventing autism, combating the more specific traits of autism, like you're only focused on one thing that you really like. You can't focus on other stuff. There's a lot of information out there now. I kind of like the autistic effect that I get from my gut bacteria, but then again, some people may not like that. They
It's a
they don't.
superpower, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I used to do some crazy probiotic experiments. I was like breaking open capsules into my own ferments, and trying to inoculate strains in there. I think I've brewed kombucha before, Jun. I mean, various different things, but Yeah, I don't know how easy it is to like DIY it versus buying a product because I think I have friends that still reach out to me and say, "Yeah, I just bought this product and I added it to my culture." Do you think that would work, or are there specifics there that would determine that would be effective?
If I'm not mistaken, because I have not made my own kefir, which is what they use like the kefir cultures for. I do think that the yeast and the bacteria are already present, but if they're going to be active, if they're going to produce those molecules, that's the in and outs that I don't have any idea on. But I can
Hmm.
say that if it's been done for hundreds of years, like if this is like a family tradition and people have seen good effects from it, I don't doubt it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, at one point, this is probably the craziest thing I'd ever heard in the health community. It was like you accidentally cut yourself or you prick your finger with a little, needle, and then you add blood to your ferment. Supposedly, you get your DNA in the bacteria. uh,
Mhm.
that was like the wildest thing, and I don't know if there's any
There
science
is,
behind that.
there
Really,
is. It's
translocating DNA. I don't know.
Yes,
It's
bacteria. I think it's transformation is what they call it. Man, I should know this. This is like microbiome 101. But bacteria can pick up DNA from its extracellular environment, and it has to be small enough that it can be transported inside the bacteria. But some pieces of DNA are always going to be broken apart, and that's probably what's getting in there. But if it's viable, or if the bacteria instead uses the nucleotides for its own purposes, I have no idea. I highly doubt that it gets the DNA and it does something with it to produce a molecule, an end molecule that is going to be pro beneficial for that DNA sequence that's endogenous to us. But I do think that they might use it for their own purposes like breaking down the DNA into single nucleotides so that they can synthesize their own RNA or other nucleic acids that they produce.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Huh. Um, I was kind of switching topics. I wanted to talk about coffee. I think you're a fellow fan of
I am.
espresso.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's something that I've had a lot of personal experimentation with just on the nervous system side. I know, I've met a lot of people like here in Idaho, and I just talk to them about health on the street, and they say, "Yeah, I can't handle coffee. I could do green tea or um, but it's too stimulating for me or something." And so I've taken that to the extreme, and like I've tried different things, different supplement combinations with it, different amounts. And I've just found for me, and I think you've said it's the same for you, that going over a certain amount, like 1 cup of coffee, it will start to have negative effects. So I think for me, I was doing like even just 4 shots a day, just from two. So from 2 to 4, and just that difference started to give me like anxiety and like jitteriness cumulatively, like
Hmm.
over several months, not immediately.
Interesting. That's really interesting that you're saying it's happening cumulatively. That must mean some other system is being involved. Maybe like the neurotransmitter breaking down neurotransmitters and synthesizing it, or the vesicles. That must be what's going on, at least
Hmm.
based off of a first principle hunch. But yeah, I'm a big fan of coffee. I've always liked coffee, but I've also recognized that I when I said I didn't like coffee was when I didn't know I was drinking too much coffee. That's basically it. If I have a single cup of coffee a day and it's early in the morning, I'm totally fine. I can sleep well. I'm focused. I don't have jitters, nothing. If I have 2 cups of homemade, organic, everything that you can imagine possibly being right about the coffee type, the coffee being dark roast, etc., which is lower in not nicotine, in caffeine content, I can have 2 cups of those extremely healthy coffees, and just having that second cup is the reason why I start to get jitters and I start to feel bad. So clearly, it's a dose response here, and that shouldn't be surprising. Caffeine has a specific dose where it's really useful. Anything beyond that, and it just raises adrenaline, it lowers GABA signaling, and that could be one of the reasons why people feel the effects that they do. Now, some people may have a harder time converting the neurotransmitters that get upregulated with caffeine intake, like dopamine and norepinephrine, and it might build up and it might cause over signaling, over excitation, over depolarization of the neurons that you start to feel really bad effects from it cognitively. And if neurons are damaged from, say, oxidized dopamine products. I forgot what exactly the molecule is called. I believe it's DOPAC, the abbreviation for the oxidized dopamine that gets produced if you don't break it down properly or if you don't convert it. Then that's going to have a really bad effect on neurons. And that's a permanent effect because we don't make new neurons in certain regions of the brain. In certain regions, you do make it, like the hippocampus, there's neurogenesis, but there's regions of the brain where that doesn't occur. And if those neurons are damaged, the signaling pattern can be damaged, and they have long-term effects from caffeine intake. There's other distinctions as well. We have CYP enzymes in our brain, just like our liver has CYP enzymes. Our brain produces those same CYP enzymes. If they're produced in lower amounts or higher amounts because of genetic susceptibilities, that can alter how caffeine is metabolized. What else I can think of? Estrogen, having higher estrogen levels can change how adenosine signaling occurs. I don't know if it's adenosine signaling gets lower, meaning that the brain's already overactive, and then taking a stimulant makes it even more active than it needs to be. But I recall estrogen being a modulator. And the body fat is a big one as well. If you are somebody that needs a lot of energy throughout the day and you need more calories and you're having caffeine, I think you could tolerate more versus somebody that's lower in body fat, they need less caffeine. Those are all factors to consider, in my opinion.
Wow. Interesting. And you brought up dopamine. Like, it's my understanding, like I've had our mutual friend Tyler Pansner on the show to talk about genetics, and I think he talks quite a lot about dopamine. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's two major camps where one side tends to build up dopamine where it's too high, and then the other side tends to break it down faster where it's more likely to be low.
Yeah,
Right?
the COMT pathway, catechol methyltransferase is the enzyme. Oh man, I should review biochemistry. That's been a while, but I don't know if it's breaking down dopamine or if it's making dopamine. I don't recall. Tyrosine hydroxylase, I don't recall. But I do know that some people have enzymes that are overly active or underly active. And if you build up too much dopamine, it can once again convert to those dopamine associated byproducts that are really toxic. They start to destroy neurons, or it can convert to adrenaline, or not adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine, if I'm not mistaken. And then that can be converted to another oxidized product that's really toxic if it's not broken down. And it does depend on that COMT enzyme. And yeah, there's that enzyme is very, very important for a lot of different things. It's one of those key enzymes that you can't live without, or there's going to be big neurocognitive behavioral changes. So yeah, there's probably a group of people that don't do well with caffeine because they are producing too much dopamine already, but then others that do really good with caffeine because they need that extra boost that caffeine can provide.
Hmm. Interesting. Are there any like foods or supplements that could help balance? Because I've done that experiment and I've heard over the years, you burn through more magnesium with caffeine, and then
Mm-hmm.
I learned, Elliot Overton, you burn through thiamine or vitamin B1
Caffeine.
with that's one thing that burns through B1 faster. But there's probably a laundry list of nutrients that are, quote, used up, to say it very simply, right?
Yeah, I'd like to think of this with the repeat perspective because it's very, very simple to think about it this way. Caffeine is a stimulant. If it's a stimulant, your metabolism raises, and so you're going to go through nutrients that are needed for metabolism in the first place. So if you drink coffee and you have a starchy carbohydrate meal, to break down that carb in general, you're going to need magnesium. You're going to need vitamin B1, vitamin B3, vitamin B12, vitamin B9. You're going to need iron. You're going to need cysteine. You're going to need a whole number of amino acids to actually break it down. And if you're burning through things faster, if you're utilizing those nutrients faster, you need more of the baseline nutrients to have it happen in the first place. So that is expected with caffeine or any other stimulant in general. So yeah, you could supplement. I would say a simple solution would be taking a B complex with caffeine, which really synergizes well for me in particular. I've seen really good effects from B complex and niacinamide in particular with coffee, and then putting shilajit in the coffee because then you provide some nutrients that or micronutrients and trace minerals that are needed in the first place.
That's awesome. Yeah, I pretty much do both of those. I do the B complex, and niacinamide is just the concentrated form of what you would find in a B complex of vitamin
Mm-hmm.
B3. And that's one thing I wanted to ask you about because you've had some interesting posts on that in the past. The difference between niacin form of vitamin B3, like what Abram Hofford used for schizophrenics, and niacinamide, which Like when I had my corneal abrasion from not wearing eye protection and limbing a tree, I was using high dose vitamin C, ascorbic acid, and niacinamide, and I really credit that combo
Hmm,
for helping my eye heal. Um, while it was in excruciating pain, I mean, it was 4 days
really interesting.
healed, but amazing for eye health. Niacinamide. That's one of the things I usually highlight for that vitamin.
I had no idea that niacinamide could help with eye health.
Well,
That's really cool.
yeah, there's studies on it for macular degeneration and various, I mean, inflammation, right? But when I think of eyes, I often go to vitamin E and niacinamide. And obviously, there's other nutrients, vitamin A, right? If you don't have good night vision, do you think that's a good test that you could use more vitamin A? You can't see
Yeah,
well at night.
yeah, yeah. That for sure. Since vitamin A is so important in transduction of light, meaning how light hits the eye and transduces to a chemical signal. Vitamin A is absolutely needed for that. So I think that's very much worth it. But if the question in regards to um, what do
Like
I
what?
feel? Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. Like when? Yeah, to clarify the question, to kind of specify, make it simple. When would you use both? Like I know you're a huge fan of the niacin flush, so like
I
when
see.
would one use the niacin for niacin flush or just in general, flushing or non-flushing? And when would someone use niacinamide in different cases?
I like the niacin flush in particular because the outcome of the flush is beneficial for cardiovascular health, even if there's clinical studies on this that suggest that there is no net outcome by using niacin for heart health versus using statins. And that's based on cholesterol, LDL, HDL stuff. But there's other things that happen that are unrelated to lipids when you take niacin versus niacinamide and the flushing happens. The flushing does produce histamine. The flushing does produce serotonin. The flushing does produce um, nitric oxide. And those molecules in excess can be toxic. But the period of time that you're flushing is about 20 minutes at most for a 500 to 1,000 milligram dose. And so you do produce those products for a moment in time, but for the rest of the day, there are other things that get upregulated. Mitochondrial enzymes, mitochondrial electron transport gets upregulated. The TCA cycle gets upregulated. So there's a lot of beneficial outcomes. So much so that I remember seeing a study in which they're using niacin flush form for muscular dystrophy, a condition in which the muscles just continue to atrophy and you don't get strong. In fact, you start to waste away essentially. So if it's helping with such a harmful, deleterious condition, then it's no doubt that niacin works in many ways that are supportive for cardiovascular, skeletal muscle, cerebral health, etc. Whereas niacinamide, that flushing mechanism doesn't happen, but it still supports the baseline stuff that's needed by vitamin B3, DNA synthesis, DNA repair, even mitochondrial DNA repair, production of mitochondrial enzymes supporting the TCA cycle, preventing mitochondrial heteroplasmic accumulation. What else can I think of? Supporting senescent associated pathways, meaning it helps prevent cells from becoming senescent and senescent cell accumulation, essentially. That's why it helps with the anti-aging mechanisms and the ability to burn glucose effectively so that you're not somebody that can't tolerate carbohydrates. So that's when I would distinguish between the two. If you're just looking for some of the mitochondria associated benefits without the cerebral vascular, the vascular and the skeletal muscle associated benefits, I would say go for niacinamide. But if you're looking for some extra stuff, I would say niacin. And I would do niacin either first thing in the morning or after you've trained. And the reason why is because the lipids, free floating fatty acids will be higher after you've trained, and niacin will help bring that down so that you can actually burn glucose effectively.
Wow. And why first thing in the morning?
Just to not create a state where you're not already burning through free fatty acids in the first, like if you're waking up, free fatty acid levels are going to be elevated. You need to eat food to break that down and also increase blood sugar levels. And if you take niacin and it basically lowers those free fatty acids, you start to get hypoglycemic. So the blood sugar will be the same, free fatty acids are lower. You need to eat something immediately. And I don't like the feeling of that. That's something I've noticed in myself. So I would take it after I've trained. I've done it before I train as well, and my training suffers because those free fatty acid levels diminish. And you still need that to burn for energy and support skeletal muscle contraction.
Wow. With histamine, that's something I wanted to ask you about. With someone that has uh, chronic allergies and these reactions, could releasing a ton of histamine with a niacin flush, say in a sauna, be like a huge detox or benefit to people with like seasonal allergies? Or
I think it might worsen them simply because you're really activating mast cells. But if you're not having seasonal allergies and you just want to support general detox mechanisms, breaking things down, supporting the immune system to get revved up in the first place to clean stuff out with macrophage, with mast cells, basophils, and so on, then yeah, it can be really useful to combine niacin and an infrared sauna or just a general sauna for a couple of minutes. But if you start to get uncomfortable by it to the point like your skin gets itchy, you're really red and it's not going down after an hour, I think you've pushed it too far. So there's a range where the effects are optimal, in my opinion.
hmm, interesting. Yeah, it's been years. I think the first time I took flushing niacin out the gate, I took 720 milligrams, and it was intense.
Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
lot.
I worked my way up. I never did the 500 milligram dose on like a whim on in the start. I started with 100 milligrams and 200, 250, and then I went to 500. And even going above 500, in my opinion, doesn't have any more of a beneficial effect for me. But it's possible that for other people, because I know Abraham, forgot his last name, Hoffman, I think, he used 3,000 milligrams for his schizophrenic patients.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I went down an orthomolecular medicine rabbit hole uh like late last year, and I was reading their papers and looking at not only him but Carl Pfeiffer and um uh the vitamin C, blanking on the
Linus Pauling.
Lions Paul, of course. Yeah. Yeah, that whole crew. And uh, for me, I think Carl Pfeiffer was one of the most interesting. There's also Cathart, I think, out of Nevada. He was using high dose C in Nevada for people um, for all sorts of conditions. And they were mainly using, I think the big three were like vitamin C, zinc, and vitamin B3. And just the research on those three are fascinating, what they could
That's
do.
that's really interesting that it was just those three ingredients. I know zinc in particular was something that I got heavy into this year because of the whole viral stuff. And I started seeing how it has such a profound effect on psychiatric illnesses like bipolar disorder and it wasn't schizophrenia, it was another one, but schizoaffective disorder, things that you don't really think about much, or even eating disorders, it has an effect. And it starts to normalize neurocognitive behavior. It's really interesting. I wonder why that is. I never found out why, but it's pretty obvious that it does.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, like in the carnivore community, they say we can get enough zinc and all the nutrients from just eating enough steak and eggs and animal products? Do you think we can get enough, or everybody on Earth, I guess you could say, could get enough zinc from just the food they eat, or depending on what they're dealing with, like the
Yeah.
conditions you just mentioned,
Yeah.
supplementation could help?
I think that's the key because it depends on what the person might be dealing with. If you're somebody that's doing carnivore for fat loss and because you put on way too easily with carbohydrates for whatever reason, you eat too much with carbs and you can't stop, but with keto and carnivore you do better, then that's fine. That means you don't need more zinc. But if it's somebody that has a psychiatric illness that seems to only get better when they do the carnivore diet, but they haven't tried supplementing zinc alone instead of going that hard elimination diet approach, maybe it's worth supplementing zinc. If somebody's doing it for immune health, like most people I've seen have autoimmune diseases and rheumatic diseases, multiple sclerosis, they seem to improve when on a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet. Maybe it's because of the greater micronutrient content, and you're just meeting the baseline that you need. If you're only consuming, say, 16 ounces of steak a day, then maybe it's worth supplementing a little bit more.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you know, I've studied like the high dose with everything just because it fascinates me. Like at one time, Repeat said he was taking 50,000 IUs of vitamin A,
Mm,
um, and I think there is a time and a place to megadose different
mhm,
things.
mhm.
But when people talk about that in the context of zinc, um, every every YouTube and Instagram and Facebook reel now are always like the dangers of, is how they get the clicks. And the one I saw last night is, too much zinc is toxic. And I knew what it was about. It's if you don't take copper with it.
Hmm.
And I think the amounts they tend to say, if you're taking over, was it 60 milligrams a day, you should take 1 milligram of copper.
That's
Right.
pretty reasonable too. 60
Yeah.
milligrams of zinc is way more than most people would need if they're healthy. So, in 1 milligram of copper, I think you need 2 milligrams a day to match the daily requirements, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that. That makes sense. And what I've experienced is because I've taken a lot of zinc this year, like 100 milligrams at some points. Um, if I didn't eat more vegetables, I would see that some of my hair in my beard would turn more white, which is related to how copper is important for melanin synthesis. So if you're taking zinc and depletes copper, melanin isn't being produced, your hair turns white. And if I just stop that, things normalize. So yeah, even with higher doses, there's always a give or take depending on the situation for people. So makes sense. And I mean, I'm not surprised, right? That's basically Instagram nowadays. It's one of the reasons I'm taking some time out. It's like, what do I want to do really with Instagram? Do I just want to make these health related posts that are regurgitated and talked about all the time? Or do I want to try to educate people a little bit differently? Not sure yet.
Yeah. I'm not just saying this, but yeah, all your posts to me are always unique. So that's why
Appreciate it, man.
I'm happy to interview you. And um, yeah, I'm the same way with the high dose, like you said, getting up to 100 milligrams at some points. I did notice, like, even my own product, I was underdosing it. I was taking the zinc carnosine, 16 milligrams elemental zinc, uh, give or take 70 milligrams carnosine, L-carnosine in that one capsule. And that was doing really nothing. And like you, I think I suffered from like long haul symptoms.
Mhm.
And then I started to double it and then triple it and then getting up to like, you know, 4 to 8 capsules a day of zinc carnosine. And that's where I really started to see especially the neuro benefits, even in like mood and um, just my brain felt better overall, just taking more zinc. So,
That just reminded me how zinc is important for the androgen receptor to actually work. And in the brain, if you have allopregnanolone and DHT levels are optimal enough that they interact with the androgen receptor, you get some really calming effects from that. It's like depressive patients have low levels of allopregnanolone, they have low levels of DHT in the brain. When you increase those neurosteroids, they seem to get better. But for that to actually work, you need zinc to interact with the androgen receptor or for it to be produced in the first place. So if you're low on zinc and you start taking it, I think that's one of the ways that it helps just normalize cognitive function.
hmm. I wanted to ask you about like soluble vitamins, and you mentioned PUFAs, I think near the beginning, which I've talked about polyunsaturated fatty acids a lot, and I've highlighted the relationship between vitamin E because there are studies that show that they have a relationship where the higher the polyunsaturated fatty acid consumption, the more vitamin E you need to match it. And I have heard by some people, like even promoting canola oil, that canola oil contains um, vitamin E.
Yeah.
But, is there enough in there? Is it the same as the amount you would get in a supplement to counteract?
Yeah, the way that I think about it is always from the first principles perspective. Where does seed oils come from? They come from the plants that naturally need high amounts of vitamin E to prevent oxidation of those oils, but also for proper development of the endosperm or the seed to actually grow. There's a lot of vitamin E in seeds in the first place. So if you cold process seed oils, you're also getting some of that vitamin E that's associated with the lipids. It is a fat soluble vitamin as it is. So if you're then consuming those cold pressed oils that are oxidizable, but they're high in vitamin E, that's preventing the oxidation, you get some of the benefits of the vitamin E, plus some of the benefits of whatever metabolism occurs with the PUFAs. But if you start to overconsume the PUFAs and vitamin E levels cap out, and you're storing PUFAs now in your tissue where vitamin E isn't present or not in enough quantities, then that starts to promote the oxidative processes if it happens for whatever reason, maybe exercising, maybe UV light that stimulates it very easily, maybe being in a hotter climate. There's so many factors. Maybe the immune system is just generally active and it's going to produce those um, oxidative byproducts with COX enzymes, cyclooxygenase enzyme. So that's an important caveat. So most people can see a benefit from consuming seed oils for a period of time, say 6 weeks, 12 weeks. But then after years of consuming it and it builds up in tissues and their vitamin E levels are capped out, or if not lower from trying to prevent that oxidation process all the time, then that's when you start to see the pathology occur. This is one of the ways that um, cancer seems to operate as well, where the oxidative products of PUFA, like the aldehydes that are produced, are pro-tumorigenic, carcinogenic, mutagenic, etc. But it only ever becomes that way when the cancer cells upregulate the enzymes that break down the PUFA in the first place, like the COX enzyme, the lipid peroxidation enzymes, phospholipase enzymes, because it's important for them for metastasis. But until that happens, the PUFAs don't do anything. There's no negative effect from them.
Interesting. Huh. What often when I think of PUFAs and vitamin E, and we talked about niacinamide, I think of sun exposure. And we're in an interesting time on social media where I just see, unlimited sun exposure, never wear sunglasses, be outside all day, even if it's overcast out. And just kind of these extreme perspectives, I think, are extreme. And here we are in the Pacific Northwest, both of us on here. And I wanted to ask you about the genetic component because I'm 99% European if the 3 DNA sites I used are accurate, Northern Italian. And I believe I would need no less sunlight, and I actually feel fine going several months without getting much, pretty much. I think the UV index is like 1 right now or something. It's been overcast here for like a week. And mood wise, I feel fine. I don't know what people talk about, like seasonal affective disorder. I mean, maybe because I'm supplementing everything and I'm just balancing it out. But I just want to get your whole perspective on that, as far as racial genetics, skin color, sunlight exposure. Because to me, I'm in the right environment for my genes.
Yeah. Yeah. If I even just think about it, like with the Fitzgerald skin type, is how they determine how much UV light you need to make enough vitamin D. The lighter your skin is, the less of a UV index you need to make the same if it was a darker skin tone, and they need more UV light, a higher UV index. So the same thing is probably going on there. But then, yeah, obviously, if you've come from a European heritage where most of the time it's cloudy, overcast, there's not enough sunlight getting through, you're in a higher latitude, which might not be exposed to as much UV light in the first place, then you don't likely need as much UV light to get the benefits of mood, behavior, etc. You may need it for other purposes like, I don't know, immune signaling, because some people of European descent tend to be more prone to tuberculosis, but that's also dependent on a lot of other factors. It's hard to say that's just from vitamin D alone. I also think about how it's not vitamin D that has the influence on our mood, but the genes that get upregulated by vitamin D receptor. And you just need the molecule in the first place to actually upregulate those genes. So that's why some people supplement. They feel better with it. There's a lot of factors into it that I can't specifically point to only the genetics, but I can definitely say if you're coming from hundreds of years of a bloodline that has been situated in a northern latitude and hasn't seen as much UV light, you probably don't need to go to Costa Rica for 3 months out of the year and get as tan as possible to bring up your vitamin D levels for whatever reason. If you feel good, that should be the ultimate marker of if you're doing things right or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, I just emphasize the giving my eyes the signal. And I think now there's like years ago, I was really militant about like blocking light from my skin. I'd go out downtown with my friend and be covered up head to toe, long sleeve, beanie, trying to block as much light from hitting my skin, blue blockers on. Now I'm a little more relaxed, but living here off grid in a really natural environment, I just try to get that stimulus where I have, blue light at my office desk and, the snow reflects a lot of light. So just getting outside for 20 or 30 minutes in the morning. Um, I feel a difference doing that. And then just wearing blue blockers at night, a couple hours before bed.
Yeah.
Is that kind of your strategy in the
That's
Pacific Northwest?
that's exactly what I do. I don't really I'm coming from Florida. So Florida UV index is really high and there's plenty of sunlight year round. And I feel exactly the same so far. Granted, it's only been a couple days here, right? Less than 60 days. And I don't know exactly what it's going to be like, but I can tell you that even with the cloudier nature of the PNW, I don't feel depressed. I don't feel sad. I don't feel any negative effects from it. I'm lighter skinned now. My complexion comes out. I have Italian heritage as well. My mom's side is from Italy. So that's probably why I'm the same way as you. It's like I don't feel bad about it. But I do know certain people that are African descent, and one in particular I'm thinking of that lives in Seattle, and he doesn't do well with the cloudier days. He needs to be in southern latitudes, and there you go. That's one of the things that you're mentioning about how our genetics and where we grew up for hundreds of years plays a role in how we do with sunlight exposure.
Mm. Yeah, not to get political. I guess you can't say anything without getting political now, right? But like the mass immigration in Europe that's been happening for decades, largely from Muslim countries going into like Sweden and countries around there, Norway, and that's I believe the bigger agenda, because there's surface level, okay, what's happening, and you can make judgments there. But I think big picture, it's my opinion is it's to weaken humanity because those Muslims in those northern European countries, they are not genetically built for that latitude. Therefore, it's a weakening effect on those
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
And the weaker people are, the easier they are to control. So that's my, you know, perspective on that situation.
Yeah.
That's
Can't say that without having a clinical study. Hey man, is that randomized controlled for?
right.
Yeah.
Pretty
I agree.
wild.
Though. I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. Well, if you're not Hyperborean, then don't sit up in the northern latitudes.
um, I, I've only been to Hawaii once, but I do love the tropical fruit. I mean, although here in the States, cherimoya grows pretty well, and I love cherimoya.
Mhm.
That's a great fruit. But do you want to get into some Q&A questions? Because we have
Yeah.
quite a few here. Um, and this is actually on the same vein of what we were just talking about. So listeners sent in PUFAs, so polyunsaturated fatty acids versus saturated fat, staying in tissues for how long?
Mm.
So,
The only one that's been studied from what I'm aware, I've looked at this back in 2022, so maybe things have changed, is linoleic acid. And essentially what they found was that it has a half-life, estimated half-life, so it depends on a lot of factors, of about 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. This is by the researcher Guyanay. I don't remember exactly, but that's what has been noticed. If we look at it from a biochemical perspective, we would assume that that would be the case for most PUFAs. And the reason why, and the higher the unsaturation of the fat, the less time it stays. Whereas saturated fat probably stays the longest. Unsaturated, highly unsaturated fats like omega-3 stays the lowest. That should be what's expected because we tend to need more omega-3s quickly in comparison to omega-6 because omega-6 displace omega-3s and then the metabolism of omega-3s is much more rapid. I think there's a half-life of 6 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, for EPA or DHA, one of those.
mm,
So yeah, I would assume omega-3s, shorter half-life, omega-6, longer half-life, and then saturated fats, cholesterol, and all those lipids, much longer half-life. And that is to be expected where mammals with more of a saturated lipid content, cholesterol content, etc.
wow, that's about 6 weeks. That's incredible. Because I'm a huge fan of cod liver oil, which I've gotten so much flack for. It's so funny that that was the case, but I use it primarily in the winter. And Rosita has a great article on their site where they talk about the Vikings and how they would process it. I have Viking ancestry,
Mm.
and it's like an antifreeze. And so I take a significant amount of cod liver oil in the winter, and I think maybe the point of contention is the vitamin A storing in the liver over a long period of time and causing was it hypervitaminosis A as opposed to hypo, so an excess of vitamin A that you can't get out of the liver. But there's so much nuance to that topic. I don't know if you've delved into it, Pedro, but like for example, cold thermogenesis or cold exposure will actually liberate retinol from the liver and move it out throughout the body. So it kind of mobilizes vitamin A that's stored in the liver just from cold exposure. So it's almost like nature intelligently designed
Hmm.
us to use this antifreeze called cod liver oil in the winter, combined with cold, because going outside it was -20 last week. Um, it's kind of interesting, but
I think that you hit that spot on only because that is the exact biology of sea animals or sea fish and seals and whales. They have higher omega-3 content in the first place because it acts like an antifreeze.
mhm. So even from that like PUFA aware perspective, you can still use it to your advantage, right? Because I
Yep,
still take my
exactly.
vitamin E.
Yeah.
It's only staying in the system for about 6 weeks, right?
Yeah. From what I remember, and I bet you that's dependent on like how much vitamin omega-6 you're taking or how much you're consuming from your diet. And also if you need those omega-3s in the first place. Is there too much inflammation and the body absolutely needs it right there and then? So I'm sure it's variable. It's not like a 6 week dead set. It's probably
Mm-hmm.
maybe less 3 weeks. And then for some people longer, like 9 weeks, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. This is a good question. Glycation from other foods besides sugar, um, not causing blood sugar spike and impact. Not sure
Okay,
about the
so
second part. Yeah.
the glycation from other foods not causing so there's always glycation of any glycated products can occur of any molecule like methylglyoxal is one that I can think of that's a dialdehyde if I'm not mistaken in its structure and that can come from lipids as well so and then it causes advanced glycation end products once it interacts with sugars or once it interacts with proteins and cross-links proteins and then the second part of the question is if that raises blood sugar or if that doesn't do anything.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying. I can't really figure out.
I don't know if it raises blood sugar in general because glycated products are not they don't relate really to sugar levels other than precursor. So if you have high sugar in your bloodstream and you have these reactive molecules, you can make glycated products easier. But then afterwards, there's nothing that I can think of that relates to blood sugar. Instead, the immune system gets active because it sees that as a toxic molecule and it wants to get rid of it. And that's why it causes inflammation.
Hmm. This is a fun one. Does growth hormone in elk velvet and colostrum make it into the bloodstream?
Yeah, for a fact, it does because there have been studies looking at specifically elk velvet that I've seen recently on how it increases the activity of certain steroidogenic enzymes. Does it increase it to the point that you really see a steroidogenic effect, like the equivalent of taking trenbolone or hormone replacement therapy? No, not from what I've seen, but it does indeed do that. And does growth hormone from elk velvet, are they asking if it goes into
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure even if it didn't, it would have a local effect, like a paracrine effect, meaning wherever it is situated, whether it's in the gut or so on, it's going to have a effect right there.
Hmm. Yeah, it's my understanding, since I have an elk velvet product and I was looking into the tincture form, which I've been taking for 14 years, different brands, and the capsule form, is that the tincture form, you get more of that hormonal effect, like the IGF one, and that's
Mhm.
more concentrated in the tincture, whereas the capsule, you're kind of concentrating like, you're getting all the minerals and you're still getting that hormonal boost, but it's kind of in a different way.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
um, recommendations for teeth health.
More protein because you do need protein to replenish. That's not the enamel. I forgot exactly what it is, but protein is critical for dental health. I don't want to say highly doubts the dentin in particular. I don't want to give false hope there, but that's important. Vitamin K2 for the carboxylation process that allows new bone and new teeth to be made in the first place. Vitamin D, vitamin A, zinc, and then you do need obviously calcium in high amounts, 1,000 milligrams a day. I would say, and if you're eating a lot of red meat, that balances it out with the phosphorus, and then strontium, which is a trace mineral that's needed for bone health and dental health.
Hmm. Yeah, the other day I saw strontium in the health food store, and I've never seen that just as a standalone
Mm,
supplement. I thought that was really interesting.
mm.
Have you heard of people taking that for different things or?
Only for bone health. That's the only thing I can think of.
Okay. Um, let's see. Effects of megadosing flavonoids like apigenin and luteolin.
It'll inhibit some enzymes involved in xanthine metabolism and neurotransmitter metabolism, and also cytochrome metabolism. So CYP enzymes in particular. So if you're taking high amounts of those, you can stop breakdown of important metabolites that you don't want in your body, like what is one that xanthine molecules, well, I can't think of the exact one, but they can be really toxic and they can cause reactive oxygen species to be produced in high amounts that is so large and enough that it causes vascular disease. It's associated with heart disease very clearly. So if you take too much of these phytonutrients that are related to flavonoids, that can be one of the effects.
Wow. Interesting. Foods and supplements for skin health, specifically splotchy skin. I don't know what that means.
Splotchy. So I'm assuming like mottled skin where it's like red in some parts and
Hmm.
it's not producing enough pigment in others. I'm gonna say applying retinol 1% concentration in a small amount, maybe like a dime size amount, rub it in the hands, keep apply it on the face. That seems to help a lot with any skin issue. And then making sure you're not deficient in copper because that's important for the melanin synthesis. And there's different kinds of melanin, not just eumelanin, which is the black one, but or the brown one, but pheomelanin, which is the pigmented one that's produced in lighter skin individuals. And then glutathione really seems to help a lot with anything related to the skin. So supplementing liposomal glutathione or yeah, liposomal is the best one because oral glutathione has a lower absorption rate.
Hmm. What do you think about like oral niacinamide too?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
that as well for sure. And niacinamide is one of the things that is applied topically to skin for
mm,
any skin condition. So I definitely think that could help.
mm. What's his opinion on chrononutrition?
Uh, that's a good question because if it was me from 2 years ago, even I would have said, yeah, what nutrients you eat when matters. So chrononutrition is how nutrients dictate based off of the time that you eat them or the time of year that you eat them, dictate gene expression or dictate how you metabolize it. And I do think there's some truth to that. But if it was such an important facet of health, I think people that are eating bananas in wintertime would have some serious conditions to worry about. And we don't see
Mm.
that. So I don't think it's that important, but I do think you shouldn't eat too late. I do think that if you do better with a meal in the morning, you should eat a meal in the morning. If you do better with more protein in the morning versus at night, you should do that instead. You find out through self experimentation.
Mm. Awesome. TMA and TMAO, are they a concern?
Um, Trimethylamine and the oxide forms. I don't know because I haven't looked too deeply into it. I know that it's associated with cardiovascular disease because it has reactivity. Trimethylamines in general will always have some kind of reactivity, so it could be. But I do think that if you are healthy otherwise and you're consuming enough nutrients, vitamin C, for example, can help with TMAO. Consuming sulfur can help with TMAO. Consuming vegetables with the meat that you consume can help with TMAO. And then making sure your gut microbiome is healthy. If you have too much gas, if you have foul smelling gas, often and you seem to have bloating often, that could be a sign that you probably would benefit from other supplements that help bring down TMAO.
Awesome. Exogenous cannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system, THCA, terpenoids, etc. What are your thoughts on supplementing
I just
those?
talked to Tyler about that, Dr. Tyler Panzer, who's very big on the exogenous and cannabinoid supplementation and in general THC. But in my opinion, THC does not help me that much. In fact, it worsens. It's given me paranoia before, and this is in small amounts. And maybe it's the strain and the source. And I haven't really used weed or cannabinoids in general in a long time. But I would say that CBD, CBG, all those cannabinoids are probably really helpful for the immune system, for the nervous system in particular, to help with mood, to help with relaxation, especially because they do support neuroplasticity in great amounts. So it depends on how you feel. And if you do go with it, I would say continue it.
Yeah, I think I've looked at the anti-parasitic effects of cannabis, and it shares that with um, tobacco, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know which one in particular is the molecule involved, but I know nicotine is anti-parasitic, but I don't know anything about the cannabinoids.
Anything for hot flashes and vertigo. Yes.
That sounds like a MCAS issue, mast cell activation syndrome or disorder, and could be other things. Could be a higher estrogen. It could be related to your cycle if this is a woman, but I'm going to assume that it's mast cell related. So quercetin, which was the thing Matt and I were talking about earlier, dihydroquercetin, quercetin in general, could be something that really helps out with that.
Great. Let's see. What are some our friend John, what are some alternative pathways to reducing cortisol?
Hmm. I don't know of alternative pathways that are that important because if it were, it would be capitalized on clinically. I may just be out of the loop, and he may know something. But I'm gonna say that I noticed that when it comes to cortisol, if I don't have enough calories in general, if I'm not eating enough throughout the day, it will go up, and that's expected. Your body's looking for energy, so if that simple thing doesn't help as much, okay, then what can I recommend for that? I would recommend herbs like kava, which is a sedative in a tincture format, and making sure you don't overdo it because it can be a little bit toxic on the liver. But a tincture amount is probably not going to do much. Kava, passion flower, lemon balm, and chamomile flower can all help with reducing the levels of cortisol and helping maintain a calm state.
Hmm. What about poppy? Have you ever use that?
Yeah, I have. I've used California poppy and I've also used hops. And hops seems to be the one that's most potent for me. It does in a matter of minutes, I'm just like calm and relaxed and I'm able to rest. However, it's also highly estrogenic.
Hmm. Yeah, I've tried those hops drinks before, and it definitely chills you out. It's
Mhm.
interesting. I guess that's why men get addicted to beer, right?
Oh,
It's-
I don't know. I don't know if it's the hops in general. I remember when I was reading the history of beer, they used to make it with different ingredients. Like hops wasn't involved, and the ingredients that were used were known to support testosterone levels, which is why it was associated with aggression in males.
Hmm. Yeah, I read a book on that. It was Ancient Healing Beers or something like that. He also wrote a book on pine pollen. Stephen Herod Buhner. Yeah, that was a
Yeah,
book
I
he
know
wrote on that.
exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Uh, what are compounds capable of decreasing myostatin and increasing follistatin?
Allostatin. Yeah. Vitamin D, surprisingly, is a huge one. Sunlight exposure and pine pollen has steroidogenic molecules or anabolic molecules that are naturally present. Um, what is the other one that's really popular in the bodybuilding sphere? It's a plant-based steroid molecule. So it comes from plants. I don't remember the name, but if you look up plant steroid molecule, it's purchasable because it's not exactly like a steroid. It does have some effects on follistatin. How big of an effect, I'm not sure. And I also know that eating fertilized eggs, there's a study on it with fertilized raw egg powder as a supplement seems to increase follistatin and reduce myostatin.
Wow. We had a few questions from multiple people about um, rationale for mixing certain foods. John asked, what are the most densely packed synergistic food combos?
I'm gonna say is it for anabolic effects to really optimize performance and feel energized? I'm gonna say combining meat with some kind of vegetable like a chimichurri, like is done in Argentina. They make barbecue and they combine chimichurri, so it counteracts the negative effects of barbecuing of the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that are made when you burn meat, essentially. And then having some kind of starch like potatoes without the skin so that you digest it properly, maybe mixing a little bit of sorghum powder inside of the potatoes to increase DHT and the creatine naturally present in the meat, the carnosine naturally present in the meat, and some of the vasodilating molecules that are present in chimichurri. That's a perfect meal, in my opinion, to support um, performance and optimize just general health.
Hmm. That sounds awesome. Yeah, we've been liking like ground beef or bison with um, white rice, some avocado, sea salt, and
Mm-hmm.
masa harissa sauce. I like the mild version.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a great little meal.
Combination. Yeah, I like that.
Supplementing peptides. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's a huge one. There's a researcher, Nora Kaldi, Dr. Nora Kaldi, pronounced or spelled Nora, Nora, Kaldi, Khaldi. She's in Ireland and she's looking at peptides that come naturally from foods. She's discovered through bioinformatic analysis that there's like millions upon millions of peptides that are naturally produced in an apple that all have some effect on our physiology. And she's capitalizing on the best ones. And I think she has one that comes from dairy in particular with effects being like immune health benefits. So I think that there are a number of foods that we take for granted that contain a lot of peptides. The jellyfish collagen, funny enough, is one of them that I read about recently. And raw milk, the goat milk in particular, is one I mentioned earlier. So I do think it's worth supplementing with natural foods because peptides are hard to make and identify which ones are responsible for health at the moment.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the jellyfish collagen. That contains some pretty unique
Hmm.
peptides, right?
Hmm.
That's a fascinating one that has it's considered like type zero collagen because it's different from bovine
Yeah,
or
yeah,
your traditional fish marine source.
yeah.
Um, what about increasing calcium while working on dairy intolerance? Any tips for that?
That's a hard one because I haven't really thought about the calcium sources, but I think
May-
calcium, go ahead.
Maybe lactase enzyme, or because I've
Yeah,
used that in the
yeah.
past.
And if they have trouble with other proteins like casein, maybe switching to A2 milk if you haven't already. And let's say that they're drinking raw A2 milk, it's the best quality, and they're still having problems with the milk. Um, I know calcium is present in vegetables, and if you do go with vegetables, that's a pretty easy source. Or some nuts are okay. And if you consume just the right amount of nuts and supplement with vitamin E, I don't think you have anything to worry about. But otherwise, I'm not quite sure. I haven't really thought too heavy about that.
Hmm. This is a big question. What are his thoughts on the different compounds in ginkgo, uh, picno,
No,
picnogenol?
yeah,
It's
Pignon.
it's a hard one to say. Boswellia and clove.
Gingko Biloba contains a ton of unique phytonutrients that are rarely looked at. So ginkgolic acid is one that I can think of that supports amyloid beta. Pycnogenol is one that supports vasodilation, enzymes involved with cerebral and vascular health, and also really supports antioxidant pathways. And then the other two were
Boswellia and clove.
Boswellia and boswellic acids that are present in, I think it's frankincense is the other name for it, is really good for immune health. Really, really good for immune health. And then cloves, I like in particular a lot, and I use it in coffee. One of the reasons why is eugenol, the main compound in clove that's responsible for anti-parasitic effects, is also useful for promoting dopamine synthesis. And so you get a good amount of dopamine on top of the caffeine. You also have eugenol in there, so it helps out a lot of that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we're adding clove to the digestital soon, so
Mhm.
that's pretty cool. I think that was all the questions. I did have a question I almost forgot to ask you. We're sending in our HTMA hair clippings today from yesterday, and I think it's my second test. And I wanted to ask your thoughts on that. If you think there's any validity to it, or
There's chemists that use HTMA for environmental toxicity. So they assess with patients that have some serious issues, or they assess with animal models in which they're trying to find out if the metals that have been deposited in the animal are causing some issues and how exactly. And they use an ion-based approach, meaning that they break it apart so that it's ionized to detect the metals in the first place. But the method that they're using is hair tissue mineral analysis. It's very much legit. Is it clinically validated to the point where it's like, well, now we have an FDA test? I don't know, man. I mean, like, really, do you need it to get to that point? If you have the basic principles down and the lab is legit and they're certified in what they do and they're basing it off of already in use industry technology or academic technology, like what chemists use to detect metals, I think it's a fair test to use in the first place.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd be interested to see like the long haul COVID people and what their HTMA results like if there's a uniform,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
if they look very similar.
I got to
Uh,
do that for me.
yeah, the last time I did it, I mean that was post high dose copper, and it was kind of a short term lithium high dose. I don't know, 60 milligrams or something a day. But both of those were high, which I think it's not the end of the world. It's those are very easy to bring back into balance. So I'm curious now to see. I think it reflects like the last 3 months or something. So I'm
Yeah.
interested to see, since I've been supplementing zinc, especially what
Mhm.
my zinc to copper flipped. So
Yeah, depending on the rate of use of the metal. But like with lead and stuff and arsenic and uranium, it doesn't get used because our body doesn't need it. So it's all how fast it's being taken away through detoxification processes.
hmm yeah, yeah, it should be pretty cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, I think let me see if I had any other good questions for you because we talked about quite a few compounds. Have you looked into like fucoxanthin and
I
that
have,
compound?
I have. So one thing that I recognize about fucoxanthin recently is it contains a bond in there called an allene bond. Allene is basically, when you look at it from an atomic perspective, it's carbon double bonded to carbon, double bonded to carbon. So carbon double bonds are present in PUFAs. So that's pretty easy to think about. And that's what oxidizes the PUFA in the first place. But to have carbon double bonded to two other carbons in sequence is very unique. The molecule has to take this kind of propeller shape, and what that does is it allows it to interact with light really well. So allenes are being looked at in chiral optic materials, meaning that it's interacting with light in a specific way because it's chiral, and it's being used for material purposes that respond to light or give off light. So I can think of computer systems and computer engineering. That's really important. Well, how did this relate to biology? Well, fucoxanthin has the same sequence bond of carbon double bonded to carbon double bonded to carbon, and it's known to interact with light. I mean, most of these xanthophylls like astaxanthin and zeaxanthin, they do interact with light. That's why they get the color that they do. The orange one for astaxanthin, whereas the zeaxanthin it's probably red for zeaxanthin. But fucoxanthin gets the brown color because of this alenic bond. And why is that important again to biology is if you take it and it gets metabolized and it gets deposited into the brain and other tissues, which we know does happen with fucoxanthin, it's possible, just like vitamin A and how it interacts with light, it's also regulating circadian biology in some way when it interacts with light. That's possibly why it's also found in seafood in the first place. Why else would these organisms make fucoxanthin if it didn't have some biological purpose that relates to light and biology?
Wow. Do we know the wavelengths that fucoxanthin reacts with? Because I know like lipofuscin absorbs certain wavelength and
Yeah.
emits certain wavelength. Um,
Yeah,
Curious.
it's UV light for lipofuscin, but I don't know for fucoxanthin. Let me think, because if it's brown, it's definitely related to red light, and it must be on the very end of the red light spectrum, if not infrared light. So I'm gonna go off a hunch and say both red, infrared light, and blue light, simply because of when you absorb a wavelength of light and you emit it, it's a different wavelength. So I'm it's a hunch, but that's what I'm assuming, which would also make sense if infrared light interacts with water, and I mean it's the sea. And
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, because fucoxanthin, like years ago, I think it was like 8 or 9 years ago, I took brown seaweed extract, which tasted tasted horrible, just straight in the mouth, just brown seaweed extract powder. It was really expensive, but I think that was like the first source of fucoxanthin, and then they found it in this Phyodactylum tricornidum
Mhm.
microalgae
Gotcha.
species,
Yeah,
which is what
yeah.
we like sell. So that's pretty fascinating. Wow, that's a cool aspect about the light. And what about phosphatidylserine? Because I know I think Tyler's a big fan of phosphatidylcholine, and when you look up phosphatidylserine, oftentimes it's talked about in the same article with the choline form, and one is what on the outer mitochondrial membrane, one's in the inner. Is
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
usually how it's talked about?
Yeah, not only that, it's also a facet of the cell membrane in general, not just the mitochondrial membrane. Especially neuronal cells, they have to have a specific way that they can move. And if you have phospholipids of one type, like serine or choline, in the wrong position, it stops the movement of the cell membrane or it breaks it apart. It's not stable anymore. So it's really important for cell membrane physiology. But then it's also important for signaling processes because it's incorporated into the cell membrane of our cells and the mitochondria. It interacts with a list of proteins. One that I can think of off the top of my head is synapsin 1. This is a protein that's involved in memory and depolarization of neurons, and also secreting vesicles that contain neurotransmitters. So it's really important for,
Hmm.
I mean, a list of neurological phenomenon. Without phosphatidylserine, you don't have that interaction occur as effectively. It's the mediator between the protein and the effect that you're looking from the protein. So even with that, if phosphatidylserine can help.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, I've read the studies. Like a lot of them use a lot of studies use low dose, but then some get above a gram, like 1,000 milligrams of phosphatidylserine. But it's often talked about with cortisol reduction,
Mm.
right? So, and ginkgo has that same effect, right, of lowering cortisol.
I had no idea about those two actually.
Yeah, I mean, I usually take those two at night um, with the microalgae extract, and I feel like it helps my sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Lithium, I brought up. I wanted to ask you your thoughts on that, and maybe just a few more before we wrap up here,
Yeah.
because I think most people are familiar with lithium with the pharmaceutical form, which is carbonate. I think Britney Spears was on that, and I've actually had some people reach out concerned, like, is this safe? But when people think of lithium, they often think of that pharmaceutical, where this orotate form bound to uric acid um, is a lot safer. It's lower dose. It's better absorbed, right, than the carbonate form.
Yeah, then anything with metals bound to amino acids like magnesium glycinate, zinc picolinate, that's not an amino acid, but
Mm.
it's still a simpler molecule, organic molecule. It's going to support the absorption process and delivery to where it needs to be. Lithium orotate, the absorption I know is better than carbonate. Um, I don't know if the effects of lithium orotate are only due to lithium. I remember reading something about orotic acid helping with depression and stuff,
Mhm.
and that was fascinating to me. But I do know that lithium is the smallest, if I'm not mistaken, alkaline earth metal. If not, it's an alkaline metal, and so it has almost the same diameter when you consider charge of hydrogen or some other matter. Actually, it must be calcium because it's directly underneath it. And so, if you have low calcium levels, then that's a really important thing to consider for depression and behavior, because calcium is critical for cognitive function. So, if you're supplementing lithium, it might just have that effect because it mimics calcium. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And but aside from that, I don't know of any biological pathway that our cells use lithium for. What it might be doing is interacting with enzymes to produce certain neurotransmitters in more amounts, and then others in less amounts. That's a hunch, though.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's fascinating that like our iPhones, our my off-grid batteries, all the Teslas and EVs out there, it's like they're using this to store energy. Um, it's such like it's probably like the most popular mineral on the
Yeah,
planet right now
yeah.
because of its, all its uses.
Reactivity. Yeah.
I actually just watched a video. They're a company is developing a technology to extract lithium from seawater, and I think it's like 0.0001% or something like that. Like it's such a small amount, but their idea is it's much more sustainable than mining it. And oftentimes they use slave labor,
Hmm.
like they do with oil industry, same thing. But
Based.
um,
It's a
interesting.
joke.
uh, that's hilarious. I did want to ask you about beef liver and oyster because I think uh, that's one where a lot of people challenge the supplements, and I've heard, selling a supplement. I always hear the other side, which to me is fascinating because I want to hear the challenging perspective of why they wouldn't take it or why they don't recommend it. Practitioners don't recommend it to other people. Why I recommend oyster or beef liver supplements to other people is if they don't like the taste, or in the case of oysters, if they live inland and or oysters are out of season. Like I don't eat oysters in the summer just because they tend to be tangy and gross. So I'll supplement. And a lot of people just can't they gag if they do beef liver. So I think the capsules are great.
Mhm.
But what are your thoughts on those two encapsulated? Because I'd imagine it's like when I take my oyster supplement, and I'm being honest, as I sell the oyster supplement, it's not as potent as sitting down to dinner like I did the other night, and we had a dozen oysters, and I ate, I don't know, eight of them with lime juice. I like squeezing lime on them, and within like minutes, my brain is like lighting up like a light bulb. And I don't seem to get that same effect from the capsules, although I know I'm still getting selenium, iodine, zinc, B12, copper, all the beneficial minerals in there. But there seems to be like a missing component. I don't know if it's the water in the actual oyster that is kind of bringing everything together. I don't know what it is. But
Yeah, one of the things that I read about that comes to mind is again peptides. I'm sure there's many facets. I'm sure that in the live form, the nutrients are bound more effectively. Like zinc is bound more effectively to the proteins that carry zinc binding proteins. And if you have it desiccated, I think that the zinc dislodges, so the absorption must be less. But it's not anything too critical in which you won't get some zinc from the supplement, anyways. But one thing that I'm sure about is peptides, because if you dehydrate it and the water is not present, and water is known to interact critically with proteins, then the peptides might be, the protein might still be there, but we know that proteins fold onto themselves. And if the water is not there, they might start to open up, or they might form a different conformation in which it's no longer active as the peptide that's naturally found in the food. So you might have one of those effects on our cognitive health or on neurons that's not present in the supplement. But nonetheless, if you're looking for the baseline minerals and the nutrient composition and you don't want to eat oysters, I mean, that's a perfectly viable solution. Likewise with liver. I know many people that can't stomach liver, and taking beef liver capsules, even though it's a less total dose, if you eat 3 ounces of beef liver, or is it 2 ounces, it's the equivalent of taking 6 capsules. But nonetheless, if you can't do those 2 ounces, then what's the big deal about using the capsules? That's the same food.
right, right. Yeah, that's a good point. And I recommend people do both. I mean, I used to uh, buy bison liver raw, cut it up into cubes, put it in Ziploc bags, freeze it, and kind of like separate it into like 3 bags, and then just swallow them like pills because I don't like chewing on them. I don't enjoy the flavor of beef liver. I think oysters are much more enjoyable
Yeah.
to eat.
Yeah.
Um, so I encourage people to do those experiments. And if you could do the real thing, do the real thing. But I just think, traveling different seasons, I think supplements
Yeah.
are really, really helpful for that.
When it comes to oysters in particular, I do think that the place that you source it from matters a lot. And if you're just eating run-of-the-mill oysters in some bar in Florida, you're probably not getting the right ones.
Yeah, I think I heard a story there's some gnarly bacteria you can get from raw oysters, right?
Vibrio cholera. It's the one that causes cholera, basically.
Wow. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a fun time.
Mhm.
It's have you looked into um melatonin and high dose, like any Russell Ryder's papers or research or
I haven't seen Russell Ryder's paper, or the only researcher that I know is uh, famous for this is Dolores. Never remember her last name.
low?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I read some of the papers. I'm not particularly impressed by them, but then again, it's more of like a review paper. They're taking what they've seen, the data that they know, and they're summarizing all of that in a new way to think about melatonin and why it's so important. And I like it, but I'm the kind of guy that wants to see the chemistry actually happening. Somebody experimenting on animals, for example, and seeing which things are upregulated, downregulated with higher dose of melatonin in reference to a condition, like say cancer.
Mm.
But what I've seen so far, it's enough that even mainstream researchers have recognized that melatonin is a promising new molecule for anti-cancer treatments, for supporting chemotherapy side effects, for preventing aging-related diseases like dementia and cognitive decline that occurs with age, reducing senescent cell accumulation. What else? It's a really potent antioxidant, so much so that at every step of melatonin metabolism, it produces antioxidant molecules. So you get melatonin, it's a 2-for-1 radical and quencher. So if you have two free radicals, it quenches that for a melatonin molecule. Gets metabolized, it's another 2-for-1. Gets metabolized again, it's another 2-for-1. Gets metabolized one more time. That subsequent molecule, that metabolite, is still able to quench radicals. And I think at one step, it's a little bit more 4-for-1 or something, to the point that it's in total for all of the steps of melatonin metabolism, it's a 10-to-1 free radical quencher, which is not the same for vitamin E, not the same for vitamin C. They're 1-to-1. One molecule of vitamin C for one radical, one molecule of vitamin E for one radical. So it's a really potent antioxidant that has not been looked at as effectively.
It's at 10-to-1, right?
Yeah, 10-to-1. That's the
Wow.
estimate.
Yeah, it's amazing because uh, a couple of years ago, even I would stay at a hotel and, I'd have Dr. Mercola's EMF silver tent to sleep in. I think I only used it once, but, it's basically a Faraday tent that you zip up. And I would have my dirty electricity filters and, some other things I plug in. And now when I stay at a hotel, like did last week or a couple weeks ago, I just take melatonin and I don't worry about Wi-Fi and EMFs. And
Mhm.
I actually posted I guess it may be a different form of radiation, but I posted a quote from a study yesterday. Can melatonin help us in radiation oncology treatments? It was
Mhm.
2014 study, and it was looking at treatment with melatonin preventing tumor progression and how it basically protects against high dose irradiation. So
Yeah.
they've used melatonin in combination with
Yeah.
cancer therapy, right, to kind of protect the
If you
patient.
think about it from like what is melatonin doing in the first place when it interacts with light? It's protecting against so with UV light, um, it can help with this dissipating that energy and preventing damage to molecules like proteins and DNA. So it's not surprising that with higher energy light, like X-ray, gamma rays, it's probably doing the same exact thing. Maybe not as effectively as with UV light, but it's still helping. Whereas if you didn't have melatonin levels, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty surefire way of getting DNA damage from high energy cosmic particles with no defense mechanism.
Hmm. Last one here. Didn't ask you about magnesium, and this is a pretty common one. And I think people often talk about, taking combination of all the forms. At this point, I just pretty much take bisglycinate, taurate, and then do magnesium baths at least once a week minimum. And I'll pour in, 16 pounds of magnesium chloride in we got a big bath, a lodestone bathtub, and soak in there for a while. Um, what's your personal relationship with magnesium and thoughts on it and history?
I'd never noticed an effect from taking magnesium except glycinate. And the effect I get from glycinate is really vivid dreams, which is related to the glycine, but also the magnesium and how it interacts with the NMDA receptor. But I do know that if I don't have enough magnesium in my diet, if I'm not eating enough fruits and vegetables, or if I'm not eating enough sources of magnesium in general, I will notice it in terms of performance and energy levels. So I don't have like, I can't say I'm one of those people that is highly sensitive to magnesium and its needs, like the people that Elliot Overton talks about and how they need B1 and magnesium in high amounts. But I do think that it's a critical nutrient simply because it runs so many biological processes. And if you look at the nutrient composition of humans, which nutrients are dominant? It's something like carbon, nitrogen, and then of the trace minerals and metals, it's zinc, calcium, magnesium fits in there at a high amount. So if the body's using so much magnesium, you need it in the first place for many different things. The two things that are not thought about as often are DNA repair mechanisms in the nucleus and the mitochondria. Magnesium is always sitting in the DNA and the nucleus with polymerase enzymes to help read DNA and help repair DNA. And same thing in the mitochondria.
And for displacing heavy metals, right?
Yeah.
It plays a
Yeah.
role in that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I lied. One more Shilajit, because you mentioned it before with coffee, and I take a gram every day with my coffee. And you said putting it in coffee, just taking it externally, kind of same thing, right? Just outside of the coffee.
So with Shilajit, it's what they consider like the panacea of supplements because it contains all of the trace minerals and bioactive compounds. It is very rich in some unique compounds. It also contains some slightly toxic compounds like dibenzoyl alpha pyrrone, which is a carcinogen, but in small amounts, it acts hormetically, the same way that sulforaphane is a carcinogen, but if you take it in small amounts, it acts hormetically. And you're never going to get a really high amount of DAB, DAP, because it's always looked at with the purification process. So if you have a brand that has a certificate of analysis, they'll make sure that they don't have high amounts of these detrimental molecules. So it's enough that you get a benefit, but it's still something to keep aware of. And then it does have a risk of running high on heavy metals like arsenic, lead, and cadmium, which is again why you need to get a brand that has a certificate of analysis for testing for these things. Otherwise, it has all the trace minerals that a person may need in small quantities, and it has bioactive molecules because of the way that Shilajit is made in the first place. It's high pressure condensed biomass that then becomes a resin that secretes from high altitude mountains.
Yeah, I think I read a challenging piece on it recently, and they were saying there's just not enough concentration of each mineral of the minerals in it to make a difference. But I mean, for someone like me that's been averaging a gram a day for, I don't know, consistently maybe 4 years, something like that.
Mm.
These are trace minerals, so that has to be significant, right?
We could flip the argument on its head and say, let's say that the person really likes mushrooms. Then are mushrooms really high in the trace minerals that you need on a daily basis to acquire your requirements? And the answer would be no. It depends on the nutrient you're looking at. But like, say, if you think about potassium, probably not. So is that a reason to stop consuming mushrooms? No. Same thing with Shilajit, in my opinion.
That's a good point. Yeah. Do you guys get morels over there where you're living, by the way? Seasonally, do you know?
Yeah, there are for sure. I haven't gone out and seen or decided to get some myself, but there are.
Yeah, I think they sprout up in the same place every year, what I've been told. And
Hmm.
we have spots all over the property, and even like right next to the chicken coop, they'll pop up. It's just a matter of
Interesting.
getting them before the chickens do. So-
Free source of Shilajit.
Yeah, that's what I love about the Pacific Northwest is I mean the old growth forest, you have so much potential for foraging,
Yeah.
not only berries but mushrooms. And I think the tree mushrooms we've been seeing are like the polypores, your
Hmm.
common birch, but I'm still looking out for lion's mane. The day I see a wild lion's mane will make my year.
We got to keep it a secret, Matt. Can't let everybody into Hyperborea.
Exactly. um, this has been awesome. I think we covered everything, uh, at least for our first show. Yeah, there was so much, so I just wanted to
Yeah.
throw as many questions at you as I could, and I think we covered a lot of ground. So, where can people find you, Pedro?
Hard right now, man. I mean, my site's down and I only have Instagram at the moment. So Thucydides is the only thing. And besides that, on Twitter, the Thucydides, if you type it with the underscore at the end, just like on my Instagram account. But I'm not active on both at the moment. So yeah, for now, it's going to be a sort of ghost MIA, missing in action, but I'll be back in time and be active.
Yeah, well, I recommend go back and read all of Pedro's posts because they're awesome, especially on this topic that we covered on beneficial compounds and foods and supplements. You've written a lot of cool stuff on that. So,
Mhm.
um,
Thanks, man.
yeah, this was a lot of fun. And until we meet again in the PNW,
Sounds good, man. Happy to be here. Thanks for hosting me.
yeah, thanks, Pedro. Stick around as we close out the show. Well, that's one of those shows I'm going to have to re-listen to. I thought Pedro did an awesome job breaking down polyunsaturated fatty acids, often called PUFAs, and the relationship with vitamin E, where he was describing the COX enzymes, breaking them down, and specifically how cancer cells upregulate the enzymes that break down PUFAs, like phospholipase, the lipid peroxidation enzymes. And until that happens, the PUFAs don't have a negative effect. They just kind of sit there. But when that process does start, like he was describing from exercising or UV light or living in a hotter climate, that's when supplementing vitamin E and having that vitamin E there is critically important to handle that oxidative stress. I hope I can have Pedro back on the show at some point because there's so many more questions that I'd like to ask him. And I'm sure you guys have more questions from that show. One of the things I really appreciate about Pedro is that he doesn't get stuck in one dietary paradigm. For example, raw vegetables. He follows a lot of what would be called repeat principles, but raw vegetables, particularly raw green leafy vegetables, are definitely not a part of that. And to me, the real sign of high IQ and increased intelligence is the ability to learn from multiple different sources and not just absorb 100% of it, but take what you like and mold it together with your experience and what you already know. I cut out most vegetables and specifically salads with dinner for several years, and it did not benefit me. And as soon as I added them in, I felt so much better. And then adding in varieties of other vegetables, I just continually felt better. I'm really looking forward to eating homemade salads from the greenhouse very soon. The only plant that actually survived in our greenhouse was, interestingly enough, Siberian kale. Everything else did not sprout from seed, but Siberian kale was the only thing. So I'll be enjoying that for sure in the coming months. As Pedro mentioned at the end, if you want to follow him, he's on Twitter, or I guess now it's X, and Instagram. If you just search Thucydides, Thucydides, he has a lot of really practical, applicable information in his posts. If you'd like to check out my website, it's matt-blackburn.com. I have a CLF protocol write-up you can read about there. It's calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis, and the nuanced solutions that are there for each of those. And then under the shop tab, you can see all of the products that I'm affiliated with, all of which I use or have used over the years. And then my brand is called Mitolife. You can find that at mitolife.co. And we're actually running a huge sale right now. It's a surplus sale on several products, including Encephalon, which is an incredible brain booster with that Fucoxanthin that Pedro talked about. That's a component of the microalgae extract that's in that supplement. We combined it with phosphatidylserine and Gingko Biloba. So I take 4 of those before bed every night. And then Jellyfish Jolt, which is called type 0 collagen. It's a complete amino acid source. I take 1 capsule, sometimes 2 capsules of that after breakfast with my coffee and Shilajit. And then there's elk velvet antler. You can take that any time of day. Generally, that's going to be lunch or dinner time for me. Then we have the spore-based probiotics. It's the probiotic and endotoxin reducer. That's also half off. We have lactase enzyme, dairy absorb, digestidol, which are digestive enzymes. I think the last year or year and a half, I've noticed there's definitely a slowing of the economy and kind of going into a kind of a recession. That's been my observation anyway. So I'm doing my best to give as many sales for you guys. We have a very generous, I think one of the most generous affiliate programs in the supplement space, and we will never cancel our affiliates like I've seen a lot of companies do recently. They build up their following and newsletter list with affiliates, especially with large followings like bloggers, and then cancel all of it and leave their affiliates that were paying their mortgage, paying their car payment with that affiliate payment. They leave them high and dry. So that's a really sneaky business tactic that I've seen. So I just want to make that clear that you can tell the integrity of a business owner and a company largely by how they conduct the business. We don't run ads. We don't have shareholders. We don't have board meetings. We don't have an office. Mitolife is truly a small business with about 5 people or so on our team. And instead of paying for a fancy business location and a lounge and all the decor. And I've seen companies do crazy, ridiculous, wasteful things. I'd rather spend that money by formulating really high quality products, by paying my affiliates really generously, by giving you guys incredible discounts all the time as much as possible. I'd say, especially with the surplus sales that we have going on now, you won't find these deals in a physical health food store just because the prices are so low, especially when you include free shipping if you're in the US. I think the world would be a much better place if we evolve from simply cholecalciferol, vitamin D3 supplements, fish oil supplements, and the really basic things that are talked about, like on Dr. Oz or mainstream TV. Let's get people on vitamin K2, MK7 form. Let's get them on mixed tocopherols. Let's get them on magnesium every day, zinc carnosine, lithium orotate, higher dose melatonin than just 3 or 5 milligrams. It's when you stack these substances that you really start to see a difference in people's health. Now, I'd add Shilajit to that list as well. I'm still on a gram a day. It's 5 tablets, 200 milligrams per tablet of the compressed purified resin from Russia that we import. I take that with my coffee every day, and it's incredible brain booster. I also forgot to mention that vitamin C with polyphenols is a part of that sale. And if you don't look closely, you'll miss that the bottle's huge. It's not just 30 or 60 capsules, it's 180 capsules. So if you're just taking 2 a day, that's actually a 3-month supply for $30 currently. So I usually don't go this extensive with the Mitolife commercial. Some people say I don't talk about it enough. I just like the reviews to speak for themselves, and that's really how the word spreads with Mitolife. Just rave reviews and the positive results that people get. Last thing, check out the Mitolife Academy. If you search for that on YouTube, it's $15 a month. You get 2 private videos every month where I'm talking about my latest research and different protocols that I've found. And then the last day of every month, there's a live Q&A where you can ask me anything, usually for a couple hours. So that is all. I'll see you guys next Friday. Stay supercharged.